On May 29, 1922, the U.S. Supreme Court makes arguably the most important decision in baseball history when they vote to exempt baseball from the Sherman Antitrust Act, which means they can act as a monopoly and helps them grow bigger than ever before. Let's learn all about it today on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. I'm Ethan Reese, your guide to a rapid deep dive into sports history every day. And today's trivia question to listen for is, what important baseball historical figure was actually the original judge of the first monopoly lawsuit against organized baseball? Now, before we get going into the story, you have to understand that the American League and the National League were actually two separate leagues, but they did play each other for the World Series at the time. So this was known as organized baseball. They were basically a partnership, but there was always leagues starting up. And in 1914, one of the minor leagues for the National and American Leagues, known as the Federal League, declared itself a major league on par with both of them and started to try to sign multiple pro players. This was actually a good thing for the players as it raised their ability to get higher contracts, because at the time they had a clause in their contracts meaning they could not go to other teams. So they had no negotiating power other than quitting baseball or getting paid whatever the team wanted. But if there was another league that wanted to pay them, they could leave, which helped raise multiple player salaries. Now, the big name that the Federal League was able to sign was Walter Jones, who's second on the all-time list for wins by a pitcher behind Cy Young. But he never played for the Federal League as his team, the Washington Senators, countered and paid him enough for him to stay on their team. Now, there were multiple teams that were in this Federal League. You had the Baltimore Terrapins, the Brooklyn Tip Tops, the Buffalo Blues, the Cleveland Green Sox, the Covington Blue Sox, the Indianapolis Hoosiers, the Kansas City Packers, the New Word Peppers, the Pittsburgh Rebs, and the St. Louis Terriers. And in 1914, the Indianapolis Hoosiers won their league championship, and the following year in 1915, the Chicago Whales won the league championship. I wish some of these names were still around, such as the Tip Tops and the Peppers, but sadly, they do not. In the Federal League, actually started in 1913 across 6 cities in the Midwest, and they continued to grow, which was a great sign. And the next year, 1914, they got to 8 teams and declared themselves a major league, competing with the American and National League that we know today. And their president, James Gilmore, was fighting to make their league as popular and get as many fans as possible. They were selling their new league to the nation, and they wanted to attract well-off owners that could afford the challenges of starting a new league, and they wanted to attract players from the American and National League. And they did actually have a lot of success, signing 81 major league players and 140 minor league players, giving them all much higher salaries than they had before. But this was their ultimate downfall. Despite all this effort, in 1915, they closed the league for good. But during all of this, organized baseball, which was the American and National League, fought back ferociously, offering players more money to stay with them, and even threatening players that if they signed with the Federal League, they would not be allowed back into organized baseball. Blackballing them, it would scare many players from taking the higher contracts. But the reason why the Federal League actually failed was because franchises were going bankrupt. They weren't attracting enough fans to pay these higher salaries that they were giving out to these players. Many of their salaries they were paying were higher than the established American and National Leagues. And many of the owners just couldn't hang on to continuously lose money to the hope that maybe they would one day get into the black. But interestingly enough, in 1914, the Federal League, while they're challenging the National and American League, actually brought a lawsuit against them in Illinois. In the lawsuit, they named both the National and American League because at the time they were just two different leagues and not the Major League Baseball that we know today. And this also included all 16 teams and their presidents. And they said that they were violating the Sherman Antitrust Act, which prohibits companies from being monopolies. Now, this is a unique case as sports is a unique industry. They don't actually create anything. It's more of a entertainment type industry. So the monopolization is different. But they were doing monopolized tasks, such as intimidating players from signing against them. But the case landed on the doorstep of a familiar name if you're a baseball historian, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who later became the commissioner of Major League Baseball and was always a fan of baseball, but he actually never ruled on this case as they kept pushing it back farther and farther, and the case got taken off his docket, as many of the federal teams were starting to be bought out by major league teams, buying their players back, buying their stadiums, and things like that. And as most of the owners were going bankrupt, organized baseball paid over $450,000 to federal league owners, allowing them the chance to actually buy into major league teams, which is really what they wanted, to be part of these big time baseball leagues. But you're like, how did this get to the Supreme Court? Well, the reason is not all of the federal teams wanted the buyout, and the Baltimore Terrapins were not included in that buyout. So they filed their own lawsuit in Washington, D.C., claiming that baseball was being a monopoly. And at first, the state judge actually ruled in favor of the Baltimore Terrapins, saying that yes, organized baseball was acting as monopoly, and gave them damages of $80,000, and also required them to pay for the Baltimore Terrapins legal fees, which jumped up to $250,000 in 1919. But in December of 1920, after appeals by organized baseball, it was sent up to the U.S. District Courts, who reversed the verdict, saying that the players, it is true, travel from place to place, making it interstate commerce, but they are not the game. Basically saying that the U.S. court could not argue because it's not over interstate commerce, so it's not a federal case. But the Terrapins also appealed, which made it all the way to the Supreme Court, which they all voted in a unanimous decision to uphold the appeals court decision in 1922. Now, many people can argue the reason they gave was similar to the U.S. District Court. The games are interstate, but the players are not, and they're acting as a monopoly for the players and not the game. But many experts to this day still argue about this decision, as it's still been upheld, as it does affect interstate commerce, but no one has really brought it up again, and mainly because this allowed organized baseball to act even more of a monopoly and grow even bigger. Their salaries for their players continue to get bigger, even because of the federal league, because they needed to pay their players even more to keep them and have them not go. But as they continued to grow, they did not have any other issues. Now, it's also been brought up that other major league sports in the United States have also been brought up on this Antitrust Act, more famously being the USFL facing the NFL in the 80s. These sports leagues, the bigger they are, the more popular they are, the harder it is to take them down. They can act as a monopoly, and frankly, some of us want them to act as a monopoly. The bigger they get, the more you get to watch, the more you get to love your team, the more you get stations like ESPN and Fox Sports to cover sports, the more you can consume of sports because of the money deals they get. And it has grown the sports world from what it was back in the 1900s when players were making an average salary for a worker that makes it today, roughly $50,000. Now they're making roughly a few $1,000,000 for the average player, and it makes it a huge difference that people want to be involved. And money is also attracted to this, as everyone follows how much money they make. So acting as a monopoly can be a good thing, but it can also be sad to see the challenges grow. Is it right? I don't know. But sometimes you gotta challenge the big boys to see what might happen. Might you get burned? Yes. But if you don't try, you never know. And I want to thank you for listening to today's Daily Sports History. It means a lot that you took time to listen. And if you want me to cover a topic for you, please leave us a review wherever you're listening. Put your name and the topic you want me to cover, and I'd be happy to do it for you. And come back tomorrow for more Daily Sports History. What important baseball historical figure was actually the original judge of the first monopoly lawsuit against organized baseball? Kennesaw Mountain Landis.